among us didn't try to replicate the things they saw in the big old movies when they were little, eh? Though I wouldn't recommend trying to pull a helicopter out of the sky today. Now, if you were given a chance to actually play out those stunts on the big screen, wouldn't you take it? Hollywood actors are people too, it turns out, so it's only natural many of them would be drawn to the spectacle of action films and the chance to hurl themselves off a moving train and onto a bad guy's throat. And surely any expertly trained thespian could make the easy transition into the dumbest of all genres, right? Well, maybe not so much. For every Willis and Neeson, there are just as many well-known actors who have tried and failed to make an impact on the brawny genre. So with that in mind, I am Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 established actors who completely failed at being action stars. Number 10, Ice Cube. Ice Cube is not an action star, is he? Nor has he ever been an action star. Is he capable of realistically reenacting the violence he used to rap about? Sure. We can't ignore Boys in the Hood and Dangerous Ground, but to suggest the man behind classics like It Was a Good Day was ever primed to follow in Sylvester Stallone's footsteps is just a bit silly. For starters, only one of his quote-unquote action movies is generally looked back on with fondness, and it's the least action-oriented of the bunch. Three Kings is more black comedy than war movie, though Cube acclimatizes himself well enough to the role. The ride-along movies are decent buddy cop movies in the mold of the Lethal Weapon sequels, but again, the action is secondary. His true action vehicles have ranged from purposefully ridiculous to insultingly sloppy like All About the Benjamins, to, well, whatever the hell Anaconda is. And if you needed any proof that Cube simply can't hang with the action crowd, his flabby attempt at filling in for Vin Diesel in the XXX sequel should put that debate to rest. Number 9, Pamela Anderson. Baywatch was one of the oddest cultural phenomena of the 90s. A soap opera masquerading as an adventure series, it was ultimately just a show about lifeguards running toward danger in super slow-mo that somehow lasted for 11 seasons. One of the biggest reasons for that was the show's star, Pamela Anderson. Looking to ride the wave of Anderson's cult popularity, she was cast in the R-rated Barbed Wire, based on the Dark Horse comic of the same name. Anderson plays the titular role, a nightclub owner and mercenary who also strips on the side. No part of that sentence was made up just now. But Pam Anderson was sadly no Pam Grier. She took the movie too seriously to be camp, but not seriously enough to give it any kind of dramatic edge. Let's just call it what it is, eh? An attempt to cash in on the pubescent population that would happily give their allowance to see Pamela Anderson strut around in a leather onesie. Number 8, Chris Klein. You know your action career has no legs when its biggest high point is having starred in the worst Street Fighter movie. Now, if the only requirement to being an action star was having the biceps of a college football running back and the hair of a Greek goddess, then Chris Klein would have been unstoppable, I tell ya. Unfortunately for him though, there's a bit more to it. Klein does not have the greatest way with words, which is fine really. Half the action icons of the 80s couldn't form a complete sentence with a gun to their heads, but you at least have to know your way around a one-liner. A supercut of every line Klein's character Charlie Nash speaks in Street Fighter: The Legend of Chun-Li was lovingly assembled and thrown onto YouTube. Simply put, it's a bit of a problem. If you can't see why Klein's career as a badass action star never took off, I recommend rewatching that video, this time with the sound on. And trust me, that assemblage still might actually be better than the totality of Rollerball. Number 7, Eric Roberts. Of all the, let's say, deeply aged former action stars to be cast in an Expendables movie, Eric Roberts feels like the oddest man out. Well, aside from Kelsey Grammer, but at least he played an X-Man. Maybe it's because he's less a star than a utility player, really. Despite how wildly out of his element he appeared as a martial artist in the Best of the Best movies, casting directors just kept shoving Eric Roberts into situations where he had to convince viewers he doesn't hire guys off Craigslist to punch people for him. Then again, these action stints haven't been the most high-profile affairs. It's clear after scrolling through Roberts' wrist-cramp-inducing IMDb page that he's never turned down a job in his life. Of the hundreds of credits to his name, about a quarter of them could be loosely considered action flicks. And the best of those movies don't have Roberts doing much more than a brisk walk to the bar, let alone kickboxing someone's shins into oblivion. Number 6, Jennifer Garner. Jennifer Garner's brief foray into action films began and ended with a failed superhero mini-franchise, which is odd really because she'd spent 5 years campily kicking ass on the hit TV series Elias, which featured Garner as an international spy and master of disguise. But the transition to action films hit a wall immediately when she was cast as Elektra in Daredevil, which would turn out to rival Ben Affleck's other 2003 release, Jiggly, as his biggest box office debacle. Daredevil wasn't a completely terrible movie, it must be said, but it did not inspire much confidence in Garner as a superheroine. That wariness was proven correct with the release of her spin-off movie Elektra. It wasn't all her fault. fault. Garner was treated too much like a still comic book image, all pouty lips and awkward poses that accentuate the fact that yes, she's a grown woman. She was an able martial artist at least, but it seemed like the personality had been sucked right out of her before the director yawned, action. Number 5, Taylor Lautner. On paper, Lautner had plenty going for him in 2011. He was knee-deep in the super fandom of the Twilight series portraying Jacob Black, and before that he cornered a small section of the family adventure genre with the adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl 3D. Ah, what a time. Unfortunately, Abduction wasn't able to cash in on any of that popularity because it was, to put it nicely, only slightly more pleasant than a kick in the teeth. Watching the young Lautner wearing the mask of an action hero for 100 minutes was a surefire way to combat insomnia, but provided literally nothing else of merit to the world. The critical dismay and box office tanking of Abduction all but ripped the plug out of Lautner's future as an action star there and then. He gave it one more shot with Tracers, which was essentially a B-movie version of Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Premium Rush, but with more parkour and less on-film acknowledgement that the premise was insane. It was not very good. Number 4, Seann William Scott. It's not impossible for the star of an immensely popular teen comedy to sneak his way into the action genre. Just ask Ryan Reynolds. But it's certainly not easy. No matter how hard he tried, Seann William Scott could never run fast enough or far enough to escape the Stifler moniker. Like his American Pie pal Chris Klein, Scott was destined to be typecast. The only way around it was to branch out as quickly as possible. So he threw himself into a hodgepodge of action fare, including a heist caper, a neo-kung fu flick, an adventure tale in the mold of Indiana Jones, and, well, the Dukes of Hazzard. But the movies were all bad to mediocre, and there was still a strong stench of Stifler hanging over every one of those performances. Scott just seems more comfortable in the role of sarcastic douchebag sidekick than as a real-deal action dude. Number 3, John Cusack. Somehow, someway, the guy from Say Anything temporarily became sort of an alternative action hero. There were some good if not great nuggets that secretly touted Cusack as an action guy hidden beneath a comedy veneer, including Grosse Point Blank and Con Air, but these were never straightforward attempts at action. Those would come later, and they would come without charm or nuance. Just about every one of Cusack's movies post-2010 featured the former geek as hunk on the poster, holding a gun in only the cheesiest of poses. It actually represents the likes of The Number Station, The Carrier, Drive Hard, The Prince, Reclaim, and Arrival fairly well, as Cusack doesn't do much but wander around with a gun at his side for the duration of most of those projects. Throughout the 2010s, he put out these direct-to-streaming action movies at an alarming rate, and the fatigue showed. To call any of his performances low energy would perhaps be an insult to hibernating bears. Not of the cocaine variety, of course. Cusack clearly isn't excited at the prospect of a career renaissance, at least not in this genre, and so there's no Liam Neeson-esque gusto to carry the awful scripts. Number 2, George Clooney. Can you really call George Clooney a failure in this or any category? Well, yes, heck yes, in fact. You can justifiably call George a failed action star. He's doing pretty well everywhere else though. He's one of the greatest working actors we have. One of these low-key, multifaceted guys who can play drama, romance, and humor all with a graceful ease. Just don't ask him to do anything super physical. That is not his style. Clooney is more of a peripheral action guy where the physicality is secondary to whatever caper he's involved in. From Dusk Till Dawn was incredible, but it certainly didn't put him on the map as an action guy. And his more straightforward action fare hasn't aged particularly well, with The Peacemaker and Out of Sight eliciting either shrugs or quizzical looks from the average film buff. And then there's Batman and Robin, which effectively killed the franchise and sent it to its knees for a decade. Number 1, Ben Affleck. What made producers think the world wanted Ben Affleck as an action hero? Was it his remarkable paddle work in Dazed and Confused? Whatever the reason, Hollywood has repeatedly tried to make that happen for Affleck, but each and every time the viewing public says, no thanks, we already have our Good Will Hunting action star, and collectively walks into whichever theatre has Matt Damon stabbing bad guys with pens. Affleck simply doesn't seem to have that it factor when it comes to the run and gun genre. Of all the Jack Ryans who ever Jack Ryan'd, his performance in The Sum of All Fears was the most underwhelming. Of all the Batmans who've Batmaned, his is probably the least interesting. At least Clooney had those bat nipples to keep people's attention, eh? There seems to be some sort of curse hanging over the cast of Daredevil that keeps them from achieving success in these types of movies. But at least Affleck momentarily broke the hex for his Jason Bourne aping role in the excellent if underrated The Accountant. That may, however, have been a case of too little, too late. And that is our list. Know of any other established actors who completely failed at being action stars? Let us know all about them in the comment section right down below, and do not forget to like, share, and click on that subscribe button while you're at it. Also, if you like this kind of thing, then please head on over to whatculture.com and find some more fantastic articles just like the one this video you're watching right this very every second is based on. I have been failed action star Gareth from whatculture.com. Thank you as always for watching this lovely video today. Hopefully I'll see your faces very soon, but in the meantime, just be good to yourself. Bye bye!